My name is Clara Vance. I'm 35, and I am a ghost at my own brother's celebration. Dressed in nondescript civilian clothes, I stand at the very back of the crowd during his Marine Force Recon graduation ceremony, a complete unknown to my family who still believes I'm the one who washed out of the military. The biting irony is that I'm a colonel in Air Force Special Operations, a secret I've guarded for years under the weight of national security. As my eyes drift over the assembly of proud families, I see my brother Leo's commanding General Admiral Croft glance in my direction. His eyes, sweeping the audience, suddenly lock onto mine, widening with a flash of unmistakable recognition. Before I get into what unfolded in that moment, I'd be curious to know where you're joining from. And if you've ever had to keep a major part of your life hidden from people who had already written you off, maybe drop a like. Growing up in a coastal Virginia town, as the daughter of retired Navy Captain Marcus Vance, a certain standard of military excellence wasn't just a suggestion. It was the air we breathed. The walls of our house were a museum to my father's naval career, and our dinner table was a war room where conversations revolved around strategic command and the annals of military history. My father's commanding voice would echo through the dining room, filled with stories from his deployments. I'd watch his eyes shine with pride as my younger brother, Leo, hung on his every word. I was just as captivated, but my own interest was always met with a different kind of reception. Clara has a brilliant mind, my father would concede to his Navy friends during their visits, but she lacks the fundamental discipline for a life in the service. That judgment was a constant sting, especially since my entire childhood was a blueprint for following in his path. I was up before dawn every morning for a run. I devoured the naval tactics books on his shelves, and I applied to the Naval Academy with a flawless record of grades and test scores. The day my acceptance letter arrived was the proudest moment of my life. My father actually embraced me, an event so rare it felt like a monumental shift in our personal history. "Don't you dare waste this," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I desperately hoped was pride. The academy was everything I had imagined, a crucible that was both demanding and deeply rewarding. I excelled, graduating near the top of my class in both strategic studies and physical readiness. What my family never found out was that in my third year, I was discreetly pulled aside by a pair of intelligence officers. They had been tracking my performance and saw an aptitude in several critical areas. They laid out an offer, a spot in a highly classified program that required an immediate transfer and a vow of absolute secrecy. The program's protocols demanded I fabricate a cover story. The officers proposed the most straightforward narrative, that I'd washed out of the academy. It was brutally simple and, they argued, believable. Countless promising candidates don't make it through, so my departure wouldn't raise any flags. I accepted, clinging to the belief that my family would one day learn the truth, once my assignments permitted it. I couldn't have been more mistaken. "I just can't wrap my head around how you could throw away such an opportunity," my mother, Isabel, lamented during my first trip home after my supposed failure. Her disappointment was a tangible thing, visible in the tight line of her lips and her inability to meet my gaze. "Your father pulled so many strings to get you considered." "I never asked him to do that," I replied softly, the classified oath I had taken acting as a seal on my lips, preventing me from offering any real explanation. My father's reaction was far worse. There was no yelling, no lecture. He just stopped talking about me. When friends or relatives inquired about his children, he would light up, detailing Leo's achievements at the academy, where he was dutifully treading the path I had supposedly forsaken. When my name came up, the subject would abruptly change. Thanksgiving dinners became a master class in emotional endurance. Leo has been tapped for advanced tactical training, my father would announce, carving the turkey with surgical precision. Top of his class. We are just so proud, my mother would chime in, her hand resting on Leo's shoulder as her gaze slid right past me. It's such a comfort when your children find their true calling. My cousin Chloe, who never possessed a shred of tact, once asked me directly across the table, "So, Clara, are you still doing that data entry job at the insurance company?" This was the bland, uninteresting cover I had adopted, a corporate position so dull it actively discouraged follow-up questions. "Yes," I managed to say, swallowing the lie along with my pride. "Still there." "Good benefits, I suppose," she replied, a faint smile playing on her lips that spoke volumes about her opinion of my life choices. Meanwhile, my real career was advancing at a pace that was almost unheard of. I couldn't share stories of the nighttime operations in countries where, officially, American forces had no presence. I couldn't talk about the intelligence I'd gathered that had prevented attacks and saved countless lives, or the commendations that were piling up in a secure government facility instead of on my wall at home. I couldn't explain the long stretches of silence when I was completely off the grid, operating deep undercover. Every victory in my hidden world seemed to cast a longer shadow of disappointment in my family's eyes. The week I was promoted to major, my parents were celebrating the news that Leo had been selected for an elite training program. The day I received a silver star in a small, private ceremony, my mother was on the phone with her friends, lamenting about her daughter who just never really applied herself. Leo himself wasn't cruel. He was just following our parents' lead, and a chasm grew between us as our perceived life trajectories diverged. He'd call sometimes with news of his latest achievement, always capping it off with an awkward, "So, how's the office treating you?" I'd force myself to sound cheerful, offering vague updates about my fictional corporate existence while hatting every syllable of the deception. Years went by like this, the divide between us becoming a canyon. I learned to armor myself against my family's perception, pouring all my energy into my missions and the tangible difference I was making. But buried deep, the ache of being the family failure never truly went away. Every single success in my secret life was tinged with the bitter knowledge that the people who should have been the proudest didn't even have a clue. My pivot from the Naval Academy to Air Force Special Operations was both swift and incredibly intense. While my family pictured me licking my wounds and resigning myself to a life of civilian mediocrity, I was actually being put through some of the most grueling training the armed forces has to offer. The clandestine program that had cherry-picked me specialized in a rare fusion of intelligence gathering and direct tactical application, a combination that perfectly matched my unique skill set. Our training compound was an unmarked facility tucked away in the Virginia countryside, where our days started at 4:00 a.m. and rarely concluded before midnight. The intense physical conditioning was just the baseline. The real challenge was learning to process and act on intelligence in the midst of real-time crisis simulations, often while battling extreme physical duress and sleep deprivation. Vance, your brain is wired differently, my primary instructor, Major Keene, remarked after I successfully navigated a particularly labyrinthine intelligence scenario. You find the patterns in the chaos. This innate ability put me on an accelerated track. While the standard training course took 18 months, I completed it in 11. My first deployment came almost immediately. A low-profile intelligence-gathering mission in Eastern Europe, where escalating Russian influence was causing dangerous instability. It was during this period that Colonel Eva Rostova took me under her wing. A true trailblazer for women in special operations, she saw a reflection of her own journey in me. This system wasn't designed for people like us, Clara, she told me bluntly during one of our debriefings. But that's exactly why we thrive in it. We see the problems from angles the others never even consider. Under her mentorship, I learned to navigate not just the lethal challenges of the field, but also the subtle, persistent difficulties of being a woman in this hypermasculine, elite world. She taught me how to turn others' underestimation of me into a strategic advantage, to command with quiet authority instead of volume, and to forge networks of trust that operated outside the traditional military chain of command. Within 4 years, I had been promoted twice and was leading my own intelligence team on operations that spanned 3 continents. My specialty became the extraction of critical information from hostile environments where conventional intelligence assets were useless. One mission in Syria, in particular, yielded intelligence that thwarted a major terrorist plot on European soil. The classified report cited my exceptional judgment under extreme duress and innovative tactical approach. Yet, every time I received accolades within my secret world, the dissonance with my family life became sharper and more painful. I attended award ceremonies completely alone, watching other officers share the moment with their proud spouses and parents. I celebrated my promotions with colleagues who only knew fragments of my story, never the complete person. And I continued to play the part of the unremarkable corporate drone during my increasingly rare visits home. "Congratulations on your promotion to team lead in customer service," my mother said once during a phone call, her voice strained with the effort of showing interest in my fabricated career. In reality, I had just been promoted to lieutenant colonel following a successful counterterrorism operation in Somalia. "Thanks, Mom," I replied, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "It's just a small step up." The operational security protocols of my role demanded nothing less than absolute secrecy. As I ascended the ranks to command larger teams and more sensitive missions, my cover story had to remain airtight. Only a handful of the highest-ranking officers in the Pentagon were aware of my full service record. Most of the people I worked with only knew the parts of my history that were relevant to our joint operations. By the time I made full colonel at age 34, an achievement that put me among the youngest officers ever to reach that rank, I had directed operations in over a dozen countries, and my intelligence work had saved an untold number of lives. My expertise in counterterrorism had broadened to include dismantling human trafficking rings and neutralizing hostile cyber operations against critical national infrastructure. What made my meteoric rise even more significant was that I had accomplished it while navigating the unique obstacles that women in special operations face. I pushed through the skepticism from some of the more traditional corners of the military. I adapted to gear and tactical strategies that were primarily designed for male physiology. and I cultivated a leadership style that commanded respect in environments where a female commander was still a novelty. And through it all, I shouldered the bizarre, heavy burden of my family's disappointment. Every time I returned from a classified deployment to attend a holiday or family function, I had to step back into the costume of Clara the underachiever. I became a master at deflecting questions about my job with a smokescreen of vague corporate buzzwords and expertly steering conversations back to Leo, ever more impressive naval career. The weight of these two identities, this double life, grew heavier with each passing year. There were moments the deception felt almost unbearable, like when my father would make a casual remark about people who couldn't hack it in a real service career, or when a distant aunt would ask me with patronizing sweetness when I was finally going to find some direction in my life. But my unwavering commitment to the mission and the lives that depended on it always silenced the urge to scream the truth. The work was simply too important. The stakes were too high. If my family's low opinion of me was the price of keeping my operations secure, then it was a price I would continue to pay, no matter the personal toll. Last Thanksgiving was a particularly bitter pill to swallow. I had just gotten back from coordinating a massive joint intelligence operation with NATO forces, a tense 36-hour ordeal that had successfully prevented a major international security breach. I had no time for recovery. I went straight from the command center to my parents' house, swapping my tactical gear for civilian clothes and trading the hypervigilance of a mission for the unique tension of a family dinner. My father stood at the head of the table, raising his crystal glass for a toast. "To Leo," he announced, his voice booming with the captain's authority he never fully shed. "His selection for the Elite Force Recon Training Program continues our family's long and proud tradition of service and excellence." Everyone raised their glasses. My mother was beaming, her eyes glistening with pride. "We couldn't possibly be prouder," she added. I joined the toast, and my sentiment was genuine. Leo's accomplishment was immense, and despite the distance between us, I had nothing but respect for his hard work and dedication. But as the glasses clinked and the chorus of congratulations died down, my mother leaned over to her sister and whispered, just loud enough for me to overhear, "Well, at least one of our children is making us proud." The comment cut through me, piercing the thick skin I had spent years cultivating. I excused myself to the kitchen, claiming I was going to help with dessert but really just needing a moment to breathe. My cousin Chloe followed me, trapping me by the refrigerator. "So, still shuffling papers at that insurance company?" she asked, sipping her wine with an air of smug superiority. Chloe had recently made partner at her law firm and never passed up a chance to draw a contrast between our supposed careers. "Something like that," I replied, my eyes fixed on arranging slices of pie on a platter, unable to meet her gaze. "You know," she offered with a sickeningly fake generosity, "my firm actually has an opening in the administrative department. The pay is probably better than what you're making. I could put in a good word for you." I thanked her through clenched teeth, entertaining a brief, satisfying fantasy of her reaction if she knew I had spent the previous week briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The dinner conversation eventually turned to a recent military operation that had been all over the news, an operation I had personally helped coordinate from the intelligence side. I sat in silence as my father and uncle dissected the limited and mostly incorrect information that had been released to the public. If they had only approached from the eastern flank, my father declared with absolute certainty, they could have avoided all that initial resistance. I took a long, slow sip of water, biting back the urge to inform him that the eastern flank had been deliberately avoided. Because of intelligence, I had personally verified about hidden enemy surveillance systems. The truth burned in my throat, but I swallowed it down. After dinner, Leo announced that he and his girlfriend, Allison, a naval medical officer he'd met during training, were engaged. The room erupted in celebration. Champagne was uncorked, a fresh round of toasts was made, and my mother immediately launched into a discussion of potential wedding venues. In the middle of this joyful chaos, my secure phone vibrated against my hip with the specific pattern that signaled a highest priority alert. I slipped away into the guest bedroom to read the encrypted message. Immediate deployment orders. A critical situation had developed that required my specific expertise. Extraction was scheduled in 3 hours. I returned to the living room, pulled Leo aside to offer my sincere congratulations, and explained that a work emergency meant I had to leave right away. His happy expression soured, replaced by a familiar look of disappointment mixed with judgment. Seriously, Clara? Tonight, it's my engagement party. What kind of insurance emergency happens on Thanksgiving night? I'm so sorry, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. I wouldn't be leaving if it wasn't absolutely critical. My parents' reaction was the one I had grown to expect, a sort of weary, resigned disappointment. Of course, Clara has to run off, my mother said to our relatives, not even bothering to lower her voice. Her priorities have always been different. As I grabbed my coat, I caught my father shaking his head, that subtle gesture of disapproval that had been a shadow over my entire life. As I drove away from the celebration, my family continuing the party without me, I was already shifting my focus, mentally preparing for the classified operation that lay ahead. That mission kept me deployed through Christmas and well into the new year. When I finally made it back, I found out that my abrupt departure had become a major point of contention in the family. Leo's engagement party had been held in my absence, and my failure to attend was seen as the ultimate proof of my indifference to the family. Your brother was deeply hurt, my mother informed me during a tense phone call. After everything he's accomplished, the very least you could do is show up for his big moments. She could never know that while they were celebrating his engagement, I was leading a high-stakes intelligence operation that resulted in the rescue of 3 kidnapped aid workers. The mission earned me another commendation, one destined to be filed away in a secure vault rather than displayed on a mantelpiece. The ever-widening gulf between my professional triumphs and my personal failures was creating a tension that was becoming unbearable. Every interaction with my family felt more strained, and every lie I told felt more painful. As Leo's Force Recon graduation ceremony approached, I felt myself nearing a breaking point, torn between my solemn duty to my country and my disintegrating relationship with the people I loved. The day of Leo's graduation ceremony arrived with a clear, bright sky, the kind of perfect South Carolina weather that felt like a mockery of my internal storm. I had spent weeks wrestling with the decision to attend, knowing my very presence would be a source of tension for a family that saw me as indifferent to Leo's success. My choice to come wasn't made lightly. I had to request a rare day of personal leave, arrange for secure transport, and meticulously choose a civilian outfit that would let me fade into the background, even as I instinctively maintained a military bearing that was too deeply ingrained to ever forget. The Marine Corps recruit depot at Paris Island gleamed under the morning sun as I approached. My mind, a finely tuned instrument of observation, automatically began cataloging security checkpoints and tactical positions, my eyes picking up on details that would be invisible to any civilian. The habit was a stark reminder of just how different I was from the person my family thought me to be. I made a point of arriving late, quietly finding a spot in the back row as other families jockeyed for seats closer to the front. My parents were in a prominent spot in the family section. My father was wearing his dress uniform, radiating the pride of a naval captain whose son was now carrying on his legacy of distinguished service. My mother sat beside him, poised and elegant in a navy blue dress, her posture reflecting the military discipline she had absorbed over decades of marriage. The ceremony unfolded with the crisp precision and time-honored tradition of special warfare. Every element, from the presentation of the colors to the synchronized movements of the honor guard, followed protocols that were intimately familiar to me from my own classified ceremonies. The key difference was that this event was public, a celebration meant to be shared openly, complete with proud families and commemorative programs. My own achievements were only ever recognized in secret, hidden from the world. As the ceremony went on, I found myself splitting my attention, one part of my brain analyzing the security perimeter out of sheer professional habit, while the other part fully absorbed the gravity of what Leo had accomplished. Becoming a force recon Marine requires years of unimaginable hardship and an extraordinary level of dedication, a reality I probably understood better than anyone else in my family. Halfway through the proceedings, I saw a familiar face on the dais, Admiral Croft, who had commanded several joint operations where my intelligence team had provided critical, time-sensitive support. He was slated to give a speech as part of the leadership contingent. The sight of him sent a jolt of alarm through me. Admiral Croft was one of the few high-ranking officers who knew the full scope of my service record and my true rank. I shifted in my seat, trying to use the person in front of me as a screen, angling my body to be less conspicuous from the stage. It was a subtle, instinctual adjustment, the kind of thing you learn to do when you need to avoid being recognized. For a moment, I thought I had gone unnoticed. Then came Leo's moment. He stood tall and proud as his list of accomplishments was read aloud, his face set in the stoic, disciplined expression of a warrior receiving his honors. Despite the complex and often painful history between us, a wave of genuine pride washed over me. Whatever else had happened, my brother had earned this moment through sheer grit and unwavering determination. As the applause for Leo echoed across the parade ground, I allowed myself to relax just a fraction. In retrospect, that was my mistake. That slight movement was all it took. As Admiral Croft scanned the audience, his eyes met mine. I watched his expression shift in a split second. First a flicker of confusion, then dawning certainty, and finally an unmistakable look of shock at finding a highly decorated Air Force Special Operations colonel sitting alone, in civilian clothes, at a Marine Corps graduation. Our eyes locked for a brief, charged moment. In that silent exchange, I tried to convey a request for discretion, a plea that senior officers in our line of work are supposed to understand implicitly. The Admiral gave a nearly imperceptible nod, and I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking the crisis had been averted. The ceremony continued, and I started planning my exit strategy. I would offer Leo a quick, heartfelt congratulations and then disappear before I could get drawn into a prolonged and awkward family interaction. But as the formal proceedings ended and families began to surge toward their graduates, I saw Admiral Croft talking with another officer, Commander Shaw, while gesturing subtly in my direction. My internal alarm bells began to clang loudly. Commander Shaw had also worked with my team during a joint counterterrorism operation just last year. Now, both of them were looking my way with that particular expression of military leaders preparing to acknowledge a fellow officer. I started moving toward the exit, trying to escape the impending encounter, but the flow of the crowd worked against me, blocking my path. As families rushed forward, I found myself being pushed not toward the gate, but toward the very area where Leo was now standing with my parents. In that moment of chaotic navigation, Admiral Croft reached me, his authoritative presence seeming to part the crowd around us. I instinctively straightened my posture, years of muscle memory kicking in at the presence of a superior officer, my civilian clothes notwithstanding. What happened next would detonate the carefully constructed reality of my family's world and change the course of our lives forever. Colonel Vance, Admiral Croft's voice was clear and carried easily over the surrounding chatter. I certainly didn't expect to see you here today. The title, Colonel, hung in the air, causing nearby heads to turn. My parents, standing just a few feet away with Leo, froze mid-celebration. Admiral Croft, I responded, my body automatically snapping into a more formal stance. It's good to see you, sir. Last time we saw each other was during that joint op in the Gulf, wasn't it? He continued, either oblivious to or unconcerned by my family's presence. Your team's intelligence was flawless, as always. You saved a lot of lives on that one. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Leo's expression morphed from triumphant to utterly bewildered. My father stood as rigid as a statue, his brow furrowed in a look of profound confusion. Colonel, my father finally managed to say, the word sounding alien on his tongue as he directed it at me. There must be some kind of misunderstanding. Admiral Croft turned, finally noticing my family. A flash of recognition crossed his face as he took in my father's decorated Navy uniform. Captain Vance, he said with a nod of respect, before turning back to me with a questioning look. They don't know. Before I could even begin to formulate a response, Commander Shaw approached, extending his hand. Colonel Vance, your team's work on the Antalya operation was nothing short of remarkable. We've already implemented your extraction protocols across 3 separate divisions. The truth of my life was materializing around us, developing like a photograph in a darkroom, becoming sharper and more undeniable with every word spoken. My meticulously maintained cover, the story of professional failure I had nurtured for over a decade, was dissolving in real time. Clara, my mother's voice trembled. What are they talking about? Admiral Croft assessed the scene with the rapid comprehension of a seasoned commander. Captain Vance, Mrs. Vance, he said, addressing my parents directly. Your daughter is one of the most valuable assets we have in the special operations community. Her contributions to intelligence and counterterrorism have been extraordinary. That's impossible, my father stated flatly. Clara left the Naval Academy. She works for an insurance company. Air Force, not Navy, Admiral Croft corrected gently. And she holds a rank that reflects a truly exceptional record of service. The insurance job would have been her cover. It's fairly standard for her line of work. Leo stepped forward, the brand-new trident gleaming on his uniform. Clara, is this true? The moment had arrived, not with the careful planning of a mission, but with the sudden violence of an explosion. Years of secrecy were crashing against the force of this sudden, public exposure. As I looked at the stunned and confused faces of my family, I knew that the deception, for better or worse, was over. Yes, I confirmed, my voice quiet but firm. It's true. My father's face was a whirlwind of emotions. Disbelief, confusion, and the first dawning light of a complete reevaluation of his world. You're a colonel in the Air Force. Special Operations Command, Intelligence Division, I specified, the words feeling strange and foreign on my tongue after so many years of silence. I was recruited directly out of the academy into a classified program. The Dropout story was my cover. Other officers in the crowd who recognized me had started to drift over, creating a small, impromptu gathering that was making the revelation more public by the second. A major from Joint Special Operations gave me a respectful nod. Colonel Vance's analysis completely changed our strategic approach during the Mogadishu intervention. My mother looked like she might faint. All this time, she whispered, all this time we thought. I couldn't tell you, I said softly, looking directly at her. Most of my work is classified at the highest possible levels. The cover story was a requirement of the job. It was never my choice. Leo's expression had shifted entirely. The confusion was gone, replaced by a dawning understanding that only another military professional could truly possess. That's why you had to leave my engagement party. I was coordinating the extraction of exposed assets in Eastern Europe, I confirmed. The timeline was critical, and I couldn't explain why. My father, ever the Navy man, had regained his composure and was now processing the new information with military discipline. What is your security clearance level? Higher than I'm permitted to specify in this setting, I answered, a response that confirmed more than any direct answer could. Around us, the celebration continued, most people oblivious to the personal drama unfolding in our small circle. But within that circle, years of pain and misunderstanding were crumbling to dust under the immense weight of the truth. Admiral Croft, sensing the deeply personal nature of the moment, made a graceful exit. Captain Vance, you should be incredibly proud. Your daughter's service record is exemplary. The details are classified, but her value to this country is beyond measure. He turned to me with a final, respectful nod. Colonel, I'll see you at next month's Joint Operations briefing. As he walked away, the wall that had separated my two worlds, the accomplished military officer and the disappointing daughter, had been permanently breached. Standing there before my family in my simple civilian clothes, but now seen for the first time as Colonel Vance, I felt a vulnerability I had never experienced in countless high-risk operations. Why would you let us believe you had failed? My mother asked, the hurt in her voice raw and exposed. It was never about what you believed, I explained as gently as I could. It was about operational security. The fewer people who knew the truth, the safer my operations, and the safer the people involved. My father, filtering this revelation through his decades of military experience, was starting to grasp the sheer scale of what I had hidden. To make colonel at your age, especially in special operations. Leo, with his own fresh military training, was connecting the dots at an astonishing speed. Those trips you could never explain, the vague answers. That time you came home for Christmas with what looked like shrapnel wounds on your arm, and you told us it was from a car accident. It wasn't a car accident, I confirmed quietly. As the new reality settled over them, I could almost see them recalibrating years of memories, judgments, and perceptions. The disappointment they had harbored for me, and the disappointment I had silently endured from them, was transforming into something new, something undefined but irrevocably changed. "We have a lot to talk about," my father said at last, his voice heavy with the weight of a man who has just discovered that a fundamental truth of his life was a lie. "Yes," I agreed, "we do." The family dinner after Leo's ceremony was held at a historic inn near the base, a celebration that had been planned long before the day's shocking revelations. What was meant to be a night focused solely on Leo's achievement had morphed into something far more complex, the first truly honest family gathering of my adult life. We were seated at a private table in a quiet corner, a security-conscious choice made out of habit. My father ordered a bottle of expensive wine with an uncharacteristic generosity, as if sensing that this conversation would require a bit of social anesthetic. A heavy silence hung in the air as we all pretended to study our menus with intense focus, each of us avoiding the massive elephant that had just sat down at the table with us. "So," my father began after the waiter had taken our orders, setting his water glass down with military precision. "A colonel." It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact that he was still trying to process. I simply nodded. "That's an incredibly fast advancement," he continued, the career officer in him automatically doing the math. "Especially for someone in," he lowered his voice, "special operations." It was an unconventional path, I acknowledged. The program I was recruited into bases promotions on field performance and mission outcomes, not on standard time-in-grade requirements. My mother, who had been eerily quiet, finally found her voice. "All those times we thought you were being flaky or irresponsible, disappearing from family events, being unreachable for days on end." "I was deployed," I finished for her. "Often to places I can't name, doing things I still can't talk about." Leo leaned forward, his expression a mixture of professional curiosity and brotherly reassessment. "That scar on your shoulder, from 2 Christmases ago." "Kabul," I said simply. "An extraction operation went sideways." My father's face tightened. As a career military man, he knew exactly what went sideways was code for. "And we were giving you a hard time about missing the family photo," my mother whispered, a look of dawning horror on her face. The arrival of our salads provided a momentary reprieve. When the waiter left, my father asked the question that was clearly gnawing at him the most. "Why the Air Force? You were at the Naval Academy." I couldn't help but smile slightly. Of course, that would be his first real question. "The program that recruited me is a joint service initiative, but it's administratively managed by Air Force Special Operations Command. The work itself suited my skills, regardless of the branch. Which are, he pressed, intelligence analysis under extreme pressure, pattern recognition in asymmetric warfare environments, asset development and management, and a few other specialties I can't detail. Leo let out a low whistle. That's the heavy stuff, Clara. My mother was still wrestling with the cognitive dissonance, trying to merge the daughter she thought she knew with this stranger sitting before her. But why couldn't you tell us anything? We're your family. Operational security, I explained again, trying to keep my voice gentle. The very nature of my work means that any knowledge of my real position could have put operations, and even entire networks of people, in danger. The cover story wasn't my idea. It was created and enforced by the program. For 12 years, my father challenged, the hurt still evident beneath his military stoicism. Not a single word of truth. That's the job, Dad, I said plainly. You, of all people, should understand that some assignments require complete and total compartmentalization. He fell silent, the military officer in him forced to concede a point that the father in him wanted to reject. The main course arrived, giving us another brief pause in the intense conversation. As we started to eat, Leo broke the tension with a short, incredulous laugh. So, all those times I was bragging to you about my promotions and my training assignments. You were talking to someone who was briefing the Joint Chiefs. I finished for him with a small smile. God, I must have sounded like such a colossal idiot, he groaned, burying his face in his hands for a second. You didn't, I assured him sincerely. Your accomplishments are real and they are significant. We're just in different operational spheres, facing different kinds of challenges. My mother put her fork down, her plate barely touched. I just keep thinking about all the things we said to you, all the things we thought, the disappointment we showed you, the judgments we made. You didn't know, I said. There's no way you could have. But we should have trusted you, she insisted, her eyes welling up with tears. We should have known there was more to the story than what we could see. Instead, we wrote you off. The raw honesty of her words hung in the air between us. She was right. They had written me off, constructing a narrative about the disappointing daughter because it was the only story that fit the limited facts they had. My father, ever uncomfortable with overt displays of emotion, steered the conversation slightly. Admiral Croft mentioned a briefing next month, your upcoming promotion. Are you being considered for Brigadier General? Yes, I confirmed quietly. It's not finalized yet. His eyebrows shot up. At your age. It would be unusual, I acknowledged. The recommendation is tied to the results of the Tavros operation. That's all I can say about it. My mother wiped her eyes. And we wouldn't have known about this either, would we, if today hadn't happened? I hesitated, then decided on the truth. Probably not the details. You might have eventually found out I was in the military, but the specifics of my rank and my role would have likely remained classified. The meal continued, a strange dance of questions I could answer woven between questions I had to deflect. The hard lines of classified information remained, even in this new era of openness, creating a new, imperfect, but vastly improved form of communication. For the first time, My family was seeing the outline of my real life, even if many of the details had to remain in shadow. After dinner, my parents invited me back to their house, a simple gesture that felt monumental after so many years of emotional distance. In the living room, my mother disappeared for a moment and returned with a dusty old box. "I kept these," she said, placing it on the coffee table between us, "even though I never understood why you'd want them." Inside was a collection of mementos from my time at the academy. My midshipman's cap, academic awards, photographs from drills, items that made absolutely no sense for a mother to keep for a daughter who had supposedly failed out. And yet, she had kept them all. "Some part of me just never believed the story," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "It didn't fit the girl I raised, but I couldn't for the life of me imagine what the alternative could be." My father, after a couple of glasses of wine and hours of mental processing, had become uncharacteristically reflective. "I was the hardest on you," he acknowledged, applying his military directness to his own personal failings. "When we thought you'd washed out, I took it as a personal insult. I made it about my legacy instead of about your life." I understood why, I told him honestly. And maintaining the cover was part of my duty, even when it was hard. "Duty," he repeated, the word resonating with his very core. "At the expense of being known by your own family." Leo, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. "But things can be different now, can't they? I mean, we know the basic truth, even if the details have to stay secret." It was the question I had been pondering all evening. "Some things can be different," I agreed cautiously. "You know my real profession now, my general rank, but most of my work, my day-to-day, will have to remain classified. There will still be unexplained absences and questions I can't answer." "But we'll understand what they mean now," my mother said, a note of resolution in her voice. As the long, emotionally draining evening drew to a close, my father did something he had never done in our entire relationship. He stood up, straightened his shoulders as if addressing a fellow officer, and formally extended his hand. "Colonel Vance," he said, using my rank for the first time, "I believe I owe you both an apology and my deepest respect." I took his hand, years of military discipline keeping the lump in my throat from showing on my face. "Thank you, Captain." It was an imperfect start to a new chapter, but it was a start. A beginning where the truth, even if only partially revealed, had created the possibility of healing the deep wounds that deception had caused. As I left my parents' home that night, I felt both the continued weight of the secrets I still had to carry, and the new, unfamiliar lightness of being, at last, partially known by the people who mattered most. 6 months after Leo's ceremony, I found myself walking up the driveway to my parents' home for another family gathering. This time, it was the annual 4th of July barbecue, a Hayes family tradition that stretched back decades. The familiar knot of anxiety that used to accompany these visits had been replaced by something new. A cautious optimism about rebuilding family bonds on a foundation of honesty. As I walked toward the backyard, carrying a dish I had actually taken the time to prepare myself instead of the usual store-bought offering, I saw several of my father's old Navy buddies gathered around the grill. In years past, I would have done anything to avoid these military-heavy events, as the deception was always most difficult around men who spoke my professional language. Today was different. My father saw me and straightened up slightly. It wasn't the formal posture of military protocol, but a new kind of recognition that held its own weight. "Clara's here," he called out, using my first name but with a new tone of respect. As I got closer, he did something I never would have imagined. He turned to his friends and said, "Gentlemen, I'd like you to meet my daughter, Colonel Clara Vance, Air Force Special Operations." The introduction, so simple yet so profound, represented a seismic shift in our family's landscape. The group of retired officers nodded at me with the immediate respect of men who understood exactly what that rank and that division signified, especially for someone my age. No further details were needed. The basic facts spoke volumes. My mother came out of the house, her smile warmer than I could remember it being in years. As she hugged me, she whispered, "I put together a little display. Nothing classified, I swear." Intrigued, I followed her inside to the study, my father's sanctuary that had always been exclusively dedicated to his own naval memorabilia. There, in one corner, she had created a small, tasteful arrangement. My academy graduation photo, the handful of unclassified commendations I had been permitted to share, and a recent formal photograph of me in my dress uniform, taken after my promotion to Brigadier General. "Is this all right?" she asked, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "I wanted to honor your service, too, but I wasn't sure about the security rules." I looked at the display, a lump forming in my throat. "It's perfect," I assured her. "Nothing here compromises any operational details." Her relief was palpable. "Good. Your father looks at it every day, you know. I think he's still trying to wrap his head around it all." Back outside, I found Leo working the grill alongside our father. My brother's adjustment had been the most straightforward. It was a simple case of one military professional finally recognizing another, a shared understanding that transcended different branches and specializations. "General," he greeted me with a playful grin and a deliberately sloppy salute. "Burger or a hot dog?" "Both," I shot back, falling easily into a sibling banter that had been missing from our lives for far too long. "I just got off a 3-week diet of MREs. I'm making up for lost time." He nodded, a look of immediate understanding on his face. He knew what 3 weeks likely meant without asking any of the questions he knew I couldn't answer. This new shorthand between us, one that acknowledged the boundaries of my classified work without any resentment, had become one of the most welcome gifts of the truth. The afternoon unfolded with a sense of ease and lightness that I hadn't felt at a family gathering in more than a decade. While many topics were still off limits, the locations of my recent deployments, the nature of my current operations, the specifics of my next assignment, the fundamental truth of who I was and what I did now formed a solid foundation for all of our interactions. My father, a man always more comfortable with actions than with words, found his own ways to express his changed perspective. He introduced me to every one of his colleagues with an unmistakable pride in his voice. He would reference my operational insight when conversations turned to current military affairs. And most tellingly, he would defer to my expertise in areas where Air Force and naval operations intersected, a gesture of professional respect that meant more to me than any verbal apology ever could. As evening fell and we all gathered for the traditional Hayes family photo, I stood next to Leo, both of us finally recognized for our service, no longer compared by it. My mother arranged us with the practiced precision of a lifelong military spouse. "My children," she said to a neighbor who was taking the picture, "both serving their country, just in different ways." That simple statement, acknowledging the equal value of our two very different paths, was a recognition that would have been unimaginable just a year ago. Later, as fireworks burst across the night sky, my father came and stood beside me at the edge of the yard, where I had stepped away for a moment to check a secure message. "All good?" he asked, and the question was about more than just the message on my phone. "Yes," I confirmed, slipping the phone back into my pocket. "Nothing urgent." He nodded, keeping his gaze fixed on the patriotic display above us, a classic military man's approach to having an emotional conversation. "I've been thinking about what it cost you," he said finally. "Carrying that cover story for all those years, bearing our disappointment when you were actually doing my job," I finished for him when he trailed off. "That's all it was, Dad. The job I was assigned with the parameters it required." "But the personal cost," he insisted, his eyes still on the fireworks. "Missing out on the recognition you deserved, even from your own family." I thought about this for a moment, formulating my response with the same care I would apply to an operational assessment. "There's something freeing about being evaluated solely on the quality of your work," I offered, "without any external expectations or a family legacy influencing people's perceptions. In some ways, starting with a completely blank slate allowed me to define my own path." He absorbed this perspective, giving it serious thought. "Still," he said, "I regret the judgments we made based on incomplete information." "That's the nature of intelligence work," I replied with a small smile. "Everyone is always operating with incomplete information. The difference is whether or not you recognize its incompleteness." This observation, applying a professional principle to a personal relationship, seemed to land with him. "A fair assessment," he acknowledged, the military precision back in his nod. As we rejoined the family, I reflected on the strange and transformative journey of the last 6 months. The revelation at Leo's ceremony hadn't magically erased years of pain and misunderstanding, but it had cleared the ground for something new and better to grow. The family that had once viewed me as their greatest failure was now learning to navigate a new relationship, one based on a partial truth, the maximum disclosure my position would ever allow. 2 weeks later, I stood at attention during my promotion ceremony as the stars of a brigadier general were pinned to my uniform. Unlike all my previous promotions, which had been celebrated quietly among cleared colleagues, this one included 3 chairs in the family section, occupied by my parents and my brother. The official citation was still cloaked in the deliberately vague language of special operations, the technical details of my accomplishments hidden from public view. But the pride in my family's eyes needed no such explanation. They understood enough now. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. As the ceremony concluded and I went to join them, my mother hugged me, tears streaming down her face. "I always knew you were exceptional," she whispered. "I just didn't know how." My father, ever the naval captain, extended his hand for a formal shake, but his professional composure broke for a moment. He pulled me into a brief, tight hug. "Well done, General Vance," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Well done." The journey from being the family disappointment to a recognized professional had been a long and complicated one. shadowed by necessary secrets that would never fully go away. But standing there with my family, accepting their congratulations for an achievement they could finally see and acknowledge, I found a profound sense of peace in being known, imperfectly, incompletely, but meaningfully, after so many years of living in the shadows. For anyone out there who has ever been misjudged or had their worth underestimated, I think there's a powerful truth in this story. Sometimes, the reality of who you are emerges in the most unexpected ways. The perceptions that others hold of you are often just a product of the limited information they have. The value you create through your own work and your own choices is real, even when it goes unseen. And authenticity, even when it has to be incomplete, creates a path for connection that deception never can. Have you ever been misjudged based on appearances, or had to keep a significant part of yourself hidden for reasons you couldn't explain? I would be honored to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story of family, secrets, and reconciliation resonated with you, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more stories about resilience and unexpected truths. Thank you for listening. And always remember, sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones we carry silently within ourselves, waiting for the right moment to be revealed.